And legend has it that the actors got the final scene only the night before it was filmed. Ingrid Bergman complained throughout the film that she didn't know which man she was in love with and how to play it. The director told her to, quote, play it in the middle. But the ending, when you think about it, had to be the way it is because the censorship board would never have allowed Ilsa to run off with a man that was not her husband. So the only problem was how to work it so that she would leave with her husband, but there still would be the tragic ending. There was some thought of having Victor Laszlo killed off in Casablanca and having her end up with Rick. Instead, it was felt that the movie could make a nod to the war effort, which became avid at the time the film was released. The idea was that the little love affair between Rick and Ilsa was unimportant when compared to the duties and sacrifices that people all around the world would have to undertake to defeat the Nazis. The movie got unexpected publicity when President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met in Casablanca at a time when it was in theaters. The Casablanca Conference was as famous as the movie at the time. It was held shortly after the Allied invasion of Northern Africa. The movie, though, is entirely fiction. Casablanca was not a major escape route to Europe. There were many other ways. The letters of visas, so central to the plot, never really existed. It was all a ploy for the film. My only interview with Ingrid Bergman was in Washington, D.C., when she appeared at the National Press Club, a factor that I thought a little ironic because earlier in her life she had been denounced on the floor of Congress and refused a visa to return to the United States. The scandal, which remains one of the most notorious in movie history, occurred when she gave birth to a son in Italy. The father was Italian director Roberto Rossellini, although she was still married to American doctor Peter Lindstrom. Manic public reaction was prompted by the fact that she had usually played nuns or saints and was one of the most admired women in the world. If perhaps she had played a few sluts, it would have been accepted. Today, it wouldn't be much of a scandal at all. In fact, it would be more or less ignored. Then, it was international in scope. She made a triumphant return to Hollywood some years later when she won her second Oscar for Anastasia. Actually, she won 3 Oscars. They were also for Gaslight and Murder on the Orient Express. In 1972, an apology was entered into the congressional record for due to the fact that the Congress had made an attack on her 22 years earlier. But actually, Ingrid Bergman was 3 inches taller than Humphrey Bogart, which meant that he wore platform shoes throughout the movie, and on many occasions stood on a box, or in the scenes where they were seated together, he sat on cushions, which he did not particularly like. And by the way, that the piano, I've seen 2 different places. It was at the Smithsonian Institute for a long time. And then Steven Spielberg bought it at an auction. And I've lost track of it because I don't know how Spielberg got rid of it or under what conditions. But it was auctioned off at Sotheby's in New York, and it got a price of $600,000. It was a tiny little, when you see it, it's very little. I mean, if you look at the movie and think about it, it's a very tiny little piano that was rolled around. But when you see the real thing, it's very, very little. And it actually was one of the many items that were auctioned off from Casablanca. Now, if you go to Hollywood and you take the Warner Brothers tour, there is such a thing. Warner Brothers in Burbank, they have a tour of the lot. The only set that is left for Casablanca is the facade of the Blue Parrot Club, Sidney Greenstreet's nightclub. And it is the only set, like everything else has been destroyed. At the time I met Ingrid Bergman, it was late in her career, and yet she still seemed hesitant with English and very naturally unsure of herself. She repeated to me a quote which I had heard used before when I asked her about Casablanca, and she said, "I have kissed Humphrey Bogart, but I never knew him." And Humphrey Bogart was known to be contrary with many of his leading ladies, including Ava Gardner on the Barefoot Contessa, whom he didn't like at all, and he commented on that. He says, "Well, I can hardly get to the set because your entourage of press people are in the way." And she said, "Well, I guess you'll have to get out of the way." And he said to Ava, he says, "I don't understand," because Frank Sinatra was one of his best friends, and he said, "I don't understand what Frank sees in you. You're just a little southern hillbilly girl, and he could have just any woman in the world he wanted, he's just gaga over you. I don't understand it." And Ava looked at him and says, "Well, honey child, you never will." And I told you about the battles on the set with Maya Mathal, who actually apparently was quite a match for Bogart. Most of their fights, according to the reports, she won. Some years later, I was present at what remains New York City's biggest celebration of Casablanca. It was a party hosted by the King of Morocco and presented as a fundraiser for MoMA, New York's Museum of Modern Art. It was in recognition of the 50th anniversary of Casablanca, and no one was upset when the king didn't actually show up, because he sent a plane load of entertainers and cases upon cases of very expensive champagne. The king's motive was to call attention to making movies in Morocco. Of course, not one scene of Casablanca was shot in Morocco. In fact, there was only one scene that was not on the Warner Brothers lot, and that was the first scene when Major Strasser, the German commander, arrives, that airport scene. The rest was all on the lot. But still, to the king, the setting was Morocco, and after all, his country has quite a record of films being made there. Lawrence of Arabia was shot there, as well as Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much, and Orson Welles' Othello, and more recently, the part of Kathleen Phillips that was not shot locally was shot there. The king saw the New York event as a major way to call attention to movie making in the country. And it was quite a party. The entire place was done up in tents, drapes, and lots of Moroccan desert-looking things, tassels, things like that. Few survivors from the film remain, and in fact, there was only one that was there. There was, however, a host of descendants, including the children of Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart's son, Stephen, looks a great deal like his father, taller, but a ringer for his father. His daughter, Leslie, is named for actor Leslie Howard, a star of Gone with the Wind, who was instrumental in getting Bogart into movies. Lauren Bacall, Bogart's fourth wife and most famous wife, was not present. Also, they were the three children of Ingrid Bergman, her eldest daughter, fathered by Dr. Peter Lindstrom, was Pia Lindstrom, a professional television broadcaster who spent most of the time with a TV camera by his side. I will tell you that Ingrid's twin daughter, Isabella Rossellini, is among the most incandescent and delightful persons I've ever met. It is impossible to be around Isabella Rossellini for 5 minutes without feeling joyful. She simply is a happy person, always. Her sister, Ingrid, her twin sister, was also there, and she was not in show business. And incidentally, Isabella Rossellini did make a film locally, filmed in Williamsburg, was a movie called Zelly and Me, which featured one of the only acting appearances by director David Lynch, who was there very much because he was wildly in